Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. First, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for the conversation we had last evening, and I want to thank your staff for working with me and my staff, the sponsors, and the opponents to improve this bill. I am pleased to accept all the amendments proposed in the committee analysis, which clarify the intent of the measure. One of the amendments clarifies that the implementation of this measure will coincide with the implementation of a new federal rule that must be issued by next Sunday, July 7th, under federal law. So there will be a database by law required to be produced by July 7th, and in spite of the fact that the information is now available on the web and by telephone, we have agreed to take the amendment that says this won't become effective until the database has been implemented. Now, of course, the bill goes through a process and it wouldn't become law until after that date, but just in the spirit of trying to cooperate, trying to make this measure as easy as possible for the car dealers to comply with, we have taken that amendment. So I'm also pleased to add Assemblymember Bonta as a co-author. I'm also honored to name the bill in honor of the Saylor and Lestrea families, whose family members were killed in a horrific crash in Santee near San Diego involving a used Lexus loaner car. And many of you might remember that incident where the car accelerator stuck. The car went at about 120 miles an hour. CHP officer was the driver, so someone who knew how to drive a car. The car crashed into a wall and killed him and his family. This is why SB 686 is needed. Under federal law, it is illegal for car dealers to sell new cars when they're under a federal safety recall. Can't sell a new car. That's because they're so unsafe, they pose a serious threat to public safety. However, there is no such prohibition for used cars. That is left up to the states. Used car buyers who are buying cars from auto dealers licensed by the state of California also deserve to get a car that's safe. Now, too, when you think about who the people are, generally speaking, who buy used cars, they tend to be low-income people. They tend to be students. They tend to be people who can't afford to buy a new car, for which there is already that safety protection. This measure prohibits car dealers and rental car companies from selling, renting, or loaning used cars to consumers when they're under a federal safety recall and the safety defect has not been fixed. They could still sell them at wholesale to other dealers or in any other wholesale transaction, just not to consumers at retail. Most car buyers in our state, and I mentioned teenagers, parents with children, and millions of other Californians, especially at the price of cars today, and I know because I've been looking, can't afford to buy a new car. When they buy a used car from a licensed car dealership, they expect the dealer to make sure the car is safe. Vehicles that are under a federal safety recall have serious life-threatening defects, such as brakes that fail, axles that break, components that cause it to accelerate out of control, and electrical fires. Many responsible dealers already check the safety recall status of used cars they buy by calling either the manufacturer's toll-free number or clicking on the manufacturer's website and providing the VIN, the vehicle identification number, and then getting it fixed for free. I mean, the manufacturers have to fix the car. In fact, if you're a Ford dealer and you have a Ford car that comes into your shop, a used car, and you click and find out it's under a manufacturer's recall, you can fix the car and get 100 cents on the dollar because that's what the manufacturers have to pay. So it's actually a way to make money for a dealer who just takes the time to check to see if that used car is safe under a manufacturer's recall. All right, now, it's easy to do, and frankly, it's good for business. But members, these unsafe recalled cars put everyone at risk. When the brakes fail or the steering fails or they accelerate out of control, they could They could collide with a minivan full of kids, a small car, a big car. They're a danger on the road, and they shouldn't be on the road, especially if we know that they're unsafe. I have several witnesses here to testify today for SB 686. Rosemary Sheehan, who is president of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety, which is the sponsor of this measure. Salvatore Cerrito, a retired auto dealer who owned and managed many franchised new car dealerships in California. And Faye Lastrea from Vallejo. She's the mother of, is it Cleofe? Cleofe Lastrea Saylor, and Chris Lastrea, the grandmother of 13-year-old Mahala Lastrea and mother-in-law of CHP officer Mark Saylor, who were all killed in a horrific traffic accident August 28, 2009, which I just mentioned and which many of you are aware of. That morning, Mark Saylor dropped off his new Lexus at a Lexus dealership in El Cajon near San Diego. The dealer loaned him a used 2009 loaner car. He picked up his wife, their daughter, and his wife's younger brother. They were headed to a soccer game. They were killed when the loaner car accelerated, as I mentioned, reached speeds of 120 miles an hour. When the freeway ended, the Lexus entered an intersection. It collided with another vehicle. It went airborne, it flipped over, and it caught on fire. Now, this crash, as I mentioned, made headlines around the globe. Chris Lastrea called 911, which ended when the crash occurred, and his voice has been memorialized in that conversation as he was trying to fix the jammed accelerator. Now, the families, as I understand it, are still in litigation with the dealers, so Ms. Lastrea can't respond to questions after her testimony, for which I apologize, but the sponsor and I will do our best to respond if you have any questions about this. Now, look, as a state, I'm very passionate about this issue because this also happened to a constituent of mine in Ojai who lost both her daughters when the car they were driving, a Jeep, was also under manufacturer's recall. The car steering locked and the car drove head-on into a tanker truck which exploded. They exploded. They were both killed. I have a daughter myself. I somehow rather take this one very personally, as I think we all should. We all have family, whether it's our loved ones, siblings, children, parents. They're all at risk unnecessarily unless we pass this bill, or until we pass this bill. Now, the opponent's position, well, let me go back. As a state, California can't mandate that auto manufacturers perform safety recalls. That's up to the federal government. The question before you is this. In the future, when used vehicles are the subject of a federal safety recall, should car dealers be required to get the safety recall repairs done before selling or loaning them to their customers? The opponent's position that even if a used car rental or loaner is recalled prior to a crash, the dealer should be able to keep loaning it out without fixing it first. That is clearly a recipe for disaster. And I have people here with me today who have seen that recipe at fruition. This bill is supported by many groups representing diverse interests, including consumer and safety organizations, Hertz and Enterprise rental car companies, the California Nurses Association, the Latino Business Association, Safe Kids California, and the nation's largest auto insurer, State Farm's insurance company. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator. As has been our custom and tradition in this committee this year, when we have a bill that has a lot of witnesses on both sides, the way that we operate is that we'll give 10 minutes for the primary witnesses, and then any other witness after the 10 minutes will be a me too, an add-on. So however you want to organize the use of the 10 minutes with the primary witnesses who are at the table will be up to you, but we'll get the clock started.
Okay.
Good morning.
Thank you. Do you want to go ahead?
Mr. Chairman and members, my name is Faye Lastrea. My husband, Cleto, and I live in Vallejo, California. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today in support of SB 686, named in honor of the memories of my daughter, Cleofe Lastrea sailor. Son, Chris Lestrella. Granddaughter, Mahala, sailor. And son-in-law, Mark, sailor. I am deeply appreciative that Senator Jackson is championing this bill and that Assembly Member Rob Bonta has agreed to co-author it. On the tragic date of August 28, 2009, my family's lives and the sailor lives were altered forever. Beyond words and beyond measure, when we lost our beloved children and grandchild. My daughter, Cleophie, was our firstborn. Chris was the middle child of our 5 children. Love, respect, and honesty were the family values Cleophie and her brothers, Chris, embraced. Cleophie graduated from UC Davis and worked for pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. Her last job was with Ambrx in La Jolla, where she was awarded special recognition for significant technological innovations. Her husband, Mark Wesley Saylor, was a caring person with great integrity. He was a very religious man, a devout husband and father. He dedicated his life to his family, his profession as a California Highway Patrol officer, and his faith. Mark was highly respected. He's a highly respected 20-year veteran of the CHP. In 1997, he received a special commendation from the Highway Patrol for rescuing a driver who was trapped in a burning vehicle. My son, Chris Lestrella's passion was basketball. He graduated from California State University, Hayward, now East Bay, with a BS in criminal justice. He was taking classes in voice acting in order to do voice over. One reason, his call to 911 that the whole world has heard, but I cannot bear to hear, was so clear and he sounded so composed, even though he was riding in the back seat of the Lexus as it sped out of control. Mahala Manda Saylor was a promising young athlete. Her love for soccer made her team captain. He was 13 years old and about to enter Mater Dei Catholic High School. The week of the tragedy, Cleophie took off work to spend time with Mahala and help her prepare for her new school. Mahala was so excited about starting high school and attended freshman orientation on the day she died. Just 2 weeks ago, Mahala's graduating class graduated from Mater Dei High School without our precious Mahala. We never had a chance to see our lovely Mahala graduate high school. I was going to show a certificate that was given to us 2 weeks ago, awarded to Mahala in memory of our granddaughter.
There's 5 minutes left for the testimony.
On August 28, 2009, Mark left his Lexus for repairs at Bob Baker Lexus in El Cajon near San Diego. The dealership loaned him a 2009 Lexus ES350 to drive while the dealership fixed his car. That evening, Mark was driving with Cleofe, Chris, and Mahala. The loaner Lexus sped out of control. My son, Chris Lestrella, called 911. He told the operator, our accelerator is stuck. The car crashed, and our 4 precious angels all died in that accident. Chris' last words were, hold on, pray, pray, pray. No one can bring my family or replace them, my husband and I. And the rest of our family will miss them every day for the rest of our lives. I know that Mark Saylor's mother, Joan, and his father, John, feel the same devastating loss. As a mother and grandmother, I cannot comprehend why anyone would oppose this bill. Everyone should care about the safety of their customers. Everyone should be able to trust that when they buy a car, rent a car, or are loaned a car by a licensed dealer, the car is safe. I hope and pray that you will vote for the passage of SB 686. No family should have to suffer the type of horrific loss that we have been through. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to?
3 minutes left.
Yes, my name is Tori Cerrito. I'm a lifelong resident of California. I have been in the automobile business for over 45 years. I have owned major new car dealerships throughout California, both in Northern and Southern California. The manufacturers that I represented in my dealerships were Chevrolet, Pontiac, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Lincoln, Mercury, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Hyundai, Saab, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley. As I said, I've been in the automobile business all of my life, and I'm here to support the bill. It is my experience as of just, I'm still in the automobile business, and we as a practice do what this bill is calling for right now. It is so easy to do that it's part of our procedure in each dealership to get these recalls done before we sell the car. It's a practice that all of my fraternity brothers in the car business all agree that this should be done. Those that haven't are starting to now, and it's a win-win situation. When we do recalls in our dealership, we get paid at full retail from the manufacturer to fix those recalls. And for that reason, the more that we do, the more technicians that we will be able to hire, and the more jobs that we will create. It's a situation, like the senator says, that if I had any hair, I would be pulling it out, because this is such for me, a no-brainer to pass, because it just makes sense for the consumer.
We have 1 minute left.
Good morning, John Ross on behalf of the Hertz Corporation. We're in support of this bill. Hertz currently sells approximately 50,000 cars a year in this state. Our practice now is not to sell a car that's subject to a recall, and that will be our practice whether this bill passes or doesn't, but it's an obligation that we undertake now. It's also our practice and our policy not to rent a car that's subject to a recall, and for that reason we are supporting federal legislation that would establish national standards to that end.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Moffat on behalf of Enterprise Holdings. Similar to Mr. Ross's testimony, Enterprise neither rents nor sells a vehicle in this state subject to a recall. We are in support of this bill, as well as federal legislation that will set a national policy for rental vehicles throughout the country. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That will conclude the primary testimony. I'm going to present a bill in another committee. Turn this over to our Vice Chair, Mr. Jones. We'll take testimony from other witnesses in support of the bill with simply just name and affiliation, and then we'll open it up for 10 minutes for the opposition.
If other witnesses in support could line up and use the microphone on the right, please. Your left, my right.
Morgan Carvajal with the Hernandez Strategy Group on behalf of the Consumer Federation of California, also in support.
Darrell Manjikian with the California Public Interest Research Group in support of the bill. Thanks.
Any other witnesses in support?
Rosemary Shahan, President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. We're the sponsors and be happy to respond to questions. And could I just clarify, too, so that there's no misunderstanding, I want you to know that the Lexus that was involved in the crash that killed the family was not under safety recall at the time. The question is, when vehicles are under safety recall, can we prevent tragedies like that from happening?
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. I was going to ask that question. So, witnesses in opposition, please come to the table. And ma'am, if you would mind staying at the witness for questions later from this committee. Thank you. Witnesses in opposition, please. And according to the chairman, we'll go 10 minutes with primary witnesses and then witnesses in opposition after that. So, you may begin.
Thank you. Cliff Costa on behalf of the California New Car Dealers Association. We'd like to thank the committee for helping narrow the issues on the bill. However, we still remain opposed to the measure. We believe this bill wrongly targets car dealers for a rental car problem. The problem that has occurred in a number of situations that sort of led to this bill and a previous bill by Mr. Monning was in relation to a rental car accident. And unfortunately, while we feel that the tragic loss of the family today, as Ms. Sheehan has represented, that the car was not subject to recall and therefore would not be subject to this bill. We believe that the bill is premature in its nature. While the NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is coming out with regulations on Sunday, that does not necessarily mean that there will be a database that's operational. We are unaware of what NHTSA is going to require. We don't know if it's going to be a web portal. We don't know if it's going to be a database. We don't know if it's going to include open recalls, but that parts are not available to fix the recall. There's just too much uncertainty. We are, as this bill is attempting to try to do, play target practice with our eyes blindfolded. We're just unaware of what the federal government is going to do, and we ask this committee to wait until the database is operational, and then we can come back and discuss what we should be doing. This bill has a number of issues as it relates to recalls, as described by the author. The bill does not distinguish between any type of minor or serious safety recall. The definition that is proposed in the committee amendments suggests that the recall is a recall is a recall as defined by NHTSA. Well, recalls include steering columns and other issues as laid out by the analysis, but it also includes owner manuals that are misprinted, door jambs that are misprinted. Things that used to be done by a service bulletin are now being issued recalls. The question becomes, and I think this is the major policy concern for this committee, whether we should remove the vehicle out of the stream of commerce because of a door jamb sticker being mislabeled, because an owner's manual has been misprinted. We as car dealers do not want to sell unsafe cars. It's part of our business model to continue to have repeat customers. We want to have the best experience possible for our consumers. Selling them unsafe cars is not what we want to do. However, this bill will lead to non-compliance. It will lead to our dealers not knowing whether or not they can take your car in on trade, because your car, maybe your trade-in may be subject to a recall and we're not aware of it, or the parts aren't available, or it's a sticker that needs to be replaced and has not been issued yet. There are too many questions as it relates to this bill, and for that, we request a no vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Crystal Jack on behalf of CarMax. We are opposed to the bill in print and as amended with the committee amendments. Having just seen them this morning, I'm just going to react as well as possible. The first set of amendments attempt to delay the implementation until the database is operational. Our issue is that we would need a 180-day delay beyond that. The purpose for that delay is that CarMax's intention is once there is a database, assuming that we know what kind of database we're looking at, again, as Mr. Costa pointed out, we're not completely sure what that's going to look like. But CarMax would plan to write a program, a computer program, that would take all 40,000 cars in inventory and run them against that database every single night, pulling out cars out of inventory that pop up with a recall. So therefore, we need a 180-day delay of implementation so that we can craft a program that is going to adequately protect customers. Additionally, the committee amendments suggest that the check of the database should occur immediately before the transaction is completed. As I mentioned, our plan is to check them every single night. It would be very difficult to go through a car sales transaction, and at the end of, or in the middle of that transaction, you have a customer that's ready to go home with their car, they're ready to pull car seats out and put them into the new car, and you say, oh, I'm very sorry, we checked last night, there was no recall. As of this morning, there is a recall. You know, we can't sell you the car. We think that it creates a bad customer experience. We think that checking nightly is adequate and will protect customers, but to have to check immediately before the transaction, it creates logistical issues for us. And then additionally, in looking at the amendment suggested on page 15 of the analysis, adding subdivision B3 that would require us to check the manufacturer's website searchable by VIN. Would this be in addition to checking the federal database? Because that creates confusion. Additionally, only 12 out of the 33 manufacturers listed on the sponsor's website allow you to search by VIN. And all of those terms and conditions prohibit commercial use. So we would be in conflict because we would now have to search the federal database, and as this amendment is drafted, again, just reading it this morning, would also have to check a manufacturer's website, which may or may not be available, and we may or may not be prohibited from using as a dealer. So again, we have some concerns. We think that this bill is premature. We think that waiting for the regulations would be what's in the best interest of the committee, to see what those regulations look like in 1 week, to know what the database is going to look like so that we can appropriately craft a bill that is actually something that dealers can comply with, because dealers do want to comply. We have no objection to what the bill is trying to accomplish. We have an objection to the fact that we don't have a good way to comply, and we're not sure what that upcoming compliance mechanism is even going to look like. So for those reasons, we continue to oppose the bill. We do note that a commitment was made more than a month ago to delay implementation. It's very difficult to be reacting to amendments a month later that are finally available, and this bill probably should have been in print as agreed to be amended so that we could be reacting more appropriately and provide better feedback so that we, the dealers, can actually tell you how we can comply as written. So again, we think that this bill needs to be in print moving forward, if it moves forward at all, and should probably wait for the federal regulations to be promulgated this weekend, as the author mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 3 minutes left.
Mr. Chairman, members, John O'Malley representing Copart, the country's largest salvage pool. First, I want to thank the author's office, and the sponsors for continuing to work with us to see if we can reach some accommodation to address our problems. I do want to agree with the statements made by the California New Car Dealers Association and by CarMax, but Copart has a problem of a different sort. As the country's largest salvage pool, it sells total loss salvage vehicles at auction on behalf of the insurance companies that own them. They do not take title to these vehicles. They do not sell these vehicles to the general public. The majority of Copart sales are these types of transactions. However, Copart also holds a dealer's license that it uses to sell clear title vehicles. None of these vehicles are sold to the general public. In fact, Copart does not sell any type of vehicle to the general public, neither salvage nor clear title vehicles. Copart does not operate as a traditional dealership. It does not have a franchise with any manufacturer. It does not maintain or repair vehicles it sells. It does not have showrooms or sales lots. All vehicles are sold via online auction and are sold as is. Prior to the adoption 2 years ago of AB 2618, authored by a former member of this legislature, Fiona Ma, all of Copart sales were considered wholesale transactions. As a result of the passage of AB 2618 for tax purposes, a number of the sales entered into by Copart are considered sales at retail. Except for vehicles that are in certain categories. It is these vehicles that fall outside these categories that would be subject to the provisions of SB 686, even though the vehicles are purchased by businesses only and for resale purposes. We've been working with the author, as I mentioned earlier. We've been working with the sponsors to try and resolve our differences, but as of this time, we're unable to reach an accommodation and must respectfully oppose the bill. We respectfully ask for your no vote.
Thank you. There's 1 minute left. If there's any other witnesses in opposition.
Jennifer Tannehill with Aaron Reed and Associates on behalf of Auto Nation. For the concerns mentioned, we must also oppose the bill. We have 48 locations across California, and it would be a huge impact to us. And so we'd like to request your no vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other witnesses in opposition can line up on the left side over here, and please state your name and affiliation.
Jennifer Barrera on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, also in opposition.
Thank you. Any other witnesses opposed? All right, thank you. If the opposition would like to leave one or two key witnesses at the table, that would probably be good for questioning. Mr. Hagman, any other members wishing to be recognized after Mr. Hagman? Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this to. I just got a couple points, concerns, and I want to kind of go through them. First of all, I just want to confirm the lady who testified first, that was not on a recall part, that was involved in her family loss.
Yes, that's correct. The Lexus that was involved in that crash was not under a safety recall at that time. The question is whether we can prevent similar tragedies when vehicles are under a safety recall.
Okay. The second question I have is, I heard testimony about the recall, and I guess the definition of a safety recall. I guess there's certain parts that are going to be, prone to cause problems with that vehicle, and others that are more cosmetic, or you didn't follow the rules, or whatever the case may be. How do you propose to address that, a recall versus a safety recall?
There was actually testimony on that very point last month before the U.S. Senate Commerce Subcommittee by the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who was asked that question, and whether they gradate safety recalls. And he testified that there is no gradation, that there's only one reason that it's under a safety recall, and that's because it's unsafe. Now, the dealers had proposed that only in the National Auto Dealers Association and the new car dealers here in California seem to have a consistent position on this, that they would like to be able to second guess the manufacturer and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and decide, even when a vehicle is under a safety recall, maybe it's not serious enough for them to...
In this legislation, let's focus on this legislation right now.
Right.
A recall is a recall in this legislation.
That's right. The standard is when it's under a federal motor vehicle safety standard and the manufacturer has agreed to recall it, then the dealer could sell it at wholesale to another dealer or at auction, but they couldn't sell it to a consumer family.
Then I'm going to bring up the next part. I guess we talk about recalls, but not in actuality the safety of the vehicle itself. So I could have all my recalls covered on a used vehicle, but my brakes may be out of whack, my tires, my timing chain, some of the mechanical issues by wear and tear from a used vehicle, we're not saying those have to be up to a certain grade or standard at this point.
The vehicle code, I believe, has some requirements regarding the safety of vehicles, but it does
Basic
not.
safety check,
That's
correct.
right, basic. Absolutely. But that there is no bright line standard that says, once a safety recall is issued, the car should be fixed. And we've done polling on this, and we know that consumers are just astonished to hear that. And there's been a lot of news coverage about this issue of dealers selling or loaning, renting cars that are under a safety recall.
And then, back when I was in high school, the cars were pretty simple. I could work on them. And now, look at it now, if you don't have a computer, you really can't work on a lot of these vehicles.
Right.
And those computers are sometimes specific to the dealers of that type of car. So if I'm a BMW dealer and I take a Ford in for a trade-in, I'm going to have to discount that car quite a bit to my customer because I don't have the technician trained nor the computer to even look up on the Toyota. And how do we compensate for that?
May I address that, please?
Sure.
Again, my name's Torrey Cerrito, a 45-year dealer. Basically, the way that it works, let's just say that I have a Toyota dealership and I take a Chrysler 300 in trade. My service advisor gets on the phone to the service advisor down the street at the Chrysler store. We send the car down there just as we would do for any other item, and the manufacturer, Chrysler, would pay that dealer at full retail.
So you have to have your staff now take every non-dealer used car to other dealerships to get the safety recalls performed and bring it back before you can sell them.
Which we get in return, we get that business coming to us also. If everybody gets on the phone to their fellow dealers, we're all going to be hiring more technicians and getting paid from the manufacturer at full retail, and the customer is protected.
Okay, thank you. And on the last part, I guess this doesn't cover any private party sales. So if I sell from my neighbor buys my car, I'm not required to do any of this at this point.
Yes, that's correct. That's right.
I
It
can
applies
see,
only to licensed dealers.
I can see, Senator, that I definitely appreciate your goal in doing this. I do see some logistics. I don't want to require my dealers to take their used cars into other places and use the personnel to drop it off, take it back, wait for that to go on the market. I can see like a printout and say, look, at the time of your purchase, this is a printout, the safety recalls. Some of them are, minor. Now, if I'm the dealer and I print that out and I see something safety on there and I sell it that way, I'm probably open myself to a huge lawsuit because I'm aware of that safety defect now. But once this database gets up, I can see, being part of the transaction. But to do the run-around legwork, to have my staff, if I'm a car dealer, to take around to, every different used car I get in to take out, I see that being somewhat problematic. And it's going to add to the cost of that car. It's going to have to add to the cost of that car for me buying that used car as a consumer. Some of them, if I don't have a sticker in the well jam, I don't really care. If my manufacturer book is out of print, I could get that online. I don't really care as a consumer. I do care if my brakes are bad. I do care if my accelerator is going to stick or something like that, and I want to be aware of that. And I think that the awareness of this is very important. But to actually require every one of those things to be done without having the quick standard between a recall and generically or safety recall that could be life-threatening, that there may or may not be parts for how far back does it go. I'm getting aftermarket parts, and I've been on insurance, so I know all the fights we've had over the years of OEM manufactured parts versus aftermarket parts and all these different things, and especially when the OEM may not be made for the manufactured cars anymore. That puts a lot of burden and a lot of liability out for those dealers versus consumer awareness, where I can say, here's the printout, you're buying the car as is, here's the safety recalls, and you're signing away. You got the acknowledgement, and they can either buy it or not buy it. I can see that the consumer wanting to be aware, and we require that. We should require that to happen. But as far as actually every single one of these repairs going, I see that being problematic, so I'm not going to support it today.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I'd like, if I could, to just respond to a couple of them. First of all, these are safety recalls. These are situations where the NTSA, NHTSA, determines, along with the manufacturer, that this creates a safety issue for the car. So they're not really frivolous. For example, the notion that when you buy a car, they give you a warning sticker, don't put a child, an infant, in a car seat in the front seat because of airbags. That's a simple sticker, and yet that could save the life of a little baby who the parents don't realize should not be in the front seat in a car. That is the subject of a safety recall. As the dealer selling the car, you end up putting that safety sticker there so that the parents of this little baby are going to know they shouldn't put the baby in the front seat of the car because of the airbags. That is a lot different than having to fix brakes that are maladjusted or that are dangerous, that are under a nationally directed safety recall by a manufacturer. So these aren't small issues. These aren't trivial issues. These are issues that the country, the government, has determined in conjunction with the manufacturer are a safety hazard for the car. The second thing is to sell a car that has a known defect and the consumer simply says, I'll assume the risk, is one thing. But you don't drive a car just in your driveway with no other cars. This puts everybody at risk. When that car has a recall and the axle breaks or the steering wheel freezes or the brakes don't work, there are other people who are subject to that danger. That's what this bill does. It really weighs what is a minor inconvenience, as I see it, to a dealer. And we have a dealer here who says, I want my people to be safe, and I'm going to make sure they are. These are licensed dealers. I mean, when we license people, we make certain requirements that they have to do a basic safety check. We're just adding on to that if it's under a manufacturer's recall, they have to take the steps to make sure that safety issue is corrected before they sell the car.
Now, Senator, you used the example. I just want to follow up. I'm sorry for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. The safety sticker says no infants in the front seat. If I'm a 50-year-old male that doesn't want to have kids in the front seat with me, and I'm at least aware of that by the dealer and saying, look, we're missing that sticker on the front seat, okay, and I sign that off on a notice, that's not going to change my driving habits at all. It's not going to change what I do. I'm aware of that. I don't have to have the sticker up there in order to get this car. Now, if that car is 10, 12 years old now, and they don't have, the manufacturer's not building a sticker no more because they probably don't have a lot of need for those anymore. That means all these people have to start, developing a backlog of used parts things. Is that car sitting on the for parts now, or what happens to that vehicle? Why can't I as a consumer be aware of that and say, okay, I'm going to risk it. I'm not going to have the sticker on my windshield visor right now because I don't have any toddlers, I don't have any kids, and I'm going to drive around. And if I'm a private seller selling it later on to the next person who has that vehicle, I'm not required to put that sticker on either. And this doesn't do it. So what how am I accomplishing the public good there versus just a lot of things? I mean, I think I get the brakes, tires, the engine's running good, safety issues, the blinkers are working, all the normal safety checks we have the Department of Transportation already has there. But now they have everything in place when they may not be manufacturing those things anymore. That's what I have a problem with. Versus at least being aware of it as a consumer.
We'll let you address that and close if necessary. Move to Mr. Mullen, followed by Ms. Eggman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing the bill. And I want to thank you for reaching out to me to relay that you had conversations with the chair and are working to address some of the concerns. There are, for me, still a few outstanding questions. It feels just a little bit incomplete to me. So two questions for you. Can you explain why it's difficult to extend these provisions in total to rental car companies? Because one of the primary arguments against is this differentiation between dealers and rental cars. Just talk us through that if you can. Sure. And then secondarily, and you did touch on this, but have you contemplated explicitly differentiating between the serious safety recall situation and the non-serious? Or are you satisfied that your language already makes that explicitly clear, so that is a non-issue? Can you talk to both of those?
Let me defer on the first issue to Ms. Shahan, who is the one negotiating on the federal legislation, is actually working with the folks in Washington on the rental car issue, because that is a very it's more nuanced because these are cars that generally are engaged in more interstate commerce. So that to have an overall federal directive rather than a state by state by state piecemeal directive is probably the most efficient, effective, and frankly, no one's trying to make this onerous on the car companies, whether they're the dealers or the rental cars. We just want to make sure that there is safety for the people who are the consumers, the customers, the people driving the cars, and the other people on the road, so that we know to the extent we can the cars on the road are as safe as they can possibly be given what we know about them. So I'll let Ms. Shahan deal with that first issue and tell you a little about what's happening on the federal level. Originally, I will say it's interesting, they wanted this to be done on the federal level. The rental car companies put us in the federal discussion because this is something where we tend to do a lot more interstate commerce than a California licensed dealer who sells a car in California. Is different than Avis, which will rent you a car in New York that you're going to drive to Ohio, or that it's then going to be driven to Iowa and all around the country. So I appreciate that, and I'll get to the second question.
Hey, if I could respond, Assembly Member, that's a really good question about the rental car company carve-out. And the bill does apply to rental car companies regarding their sales of used cars. We actually sponsored the Monning bill in 2011 that would have applied only to rental car companies. And at the time, there was testimony by the rental car companies that members of the legislature found convincing and compelling that they have, they're huge multinational corporations. They are on a different scale, in that they engage in interstate commerce. There were questions about when a car is rented out in one state and then driven in another, which law would apply. They said that it was more appropriate to address this at the federal level. Fair number of members tend to agree with that. Assemblymember Monning decided to hold his bill, and we worked with Senator Schumer, Boxer, Feinstein, McCaskill, and others. And at first, the rental car industry was opposed to federal legislation, and then they got religion. And they've been working with us on federal legislation. They actually testified with us at the U.S. Commerce Committee hearing. They've been lobbying with us, strategizing with us, and we're optimistic about passage of that legislation. And we agreed with them, that legislation is very different from the state legislation. It's not like a cookie cutter. You can't, they actually are in a different position from dealers because of the scale, because of the interstate nature of their business. And also the federal legislation, if it's passed, will require the rental car companies to be, for the first time, regulated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. That's something that can only be done at the federal level that we can't do at the state level. So we definitely want to close the rental car safety loophole. It's just that it's more appropriate to do that at the federal level.
Mr. Chair, if I can have a moment to answer your question, Mr. Mullen. Yes, there is federal legislation that has already previously died, and the current legislation that Ms. Sheehan is talking about has had a subcommittee hearing, but has yet to take a vote, and there's no companion bill in the House. We are very concerned that there's going to be this requirement on dealers, who is not really the impetus of this bill, or the rationale, reason why this bill is being pushed forward, yet we are still burdened with the requirements. It seems to me that if it's the will of this committee and if it's your desire, Mr. Mullen, it seems to me that you can include rental car companies and include language to say if there's a federal legislation that's passed, then proceed to preempt them or exclude them from the bill from there. But it doesn't seem to us to be fair that we can't sell the car, lease the car, rent the car, or loan the car out, and yet rental car companies who have door jamb sticker issues, owner manual issues, steering column issues, in the meantime can still continue to rent those cars. That's problematic to us.
And then, Ms. Jackson, there was a two-part question, so
Yes.
could you answer the second
Yes,
part?
I just wanted to respond quickly. I'd be happy to bring that as the second step. I mean, if the easier, if you will, the easier part dealing with California and not worrying about how we're going to regulate cars that are rental cars that go from state to state to state to state, and will continue to do so. This is sort of like, well, don't include us till you include them, and then as soon as we try to include them, they say, well, don't include us, don't include them until you include us, don't include us until you include them. You got to start somewhere. This is a good place to start. This is perhaps half the battle. There is another half the battle. I have confidence in Ms. Shahan's group. They wrote the first lemon law bill, got that passed, the first lemon law bill in the country. They're a tenacious group that wants to protect consumers. They're working on this federal level. I'm more optimistic than you are, but if it doesn't pass, I'll be back working on the rental car issue. I do think, though, as Ms. Shahan pointed out, they're different issues. It's sort of apples or tangerines and oranges. There's some similarities, but enough differences that we should let the federal try to address those issues. The second part was the serious safety recalls. Safety recalls that come out of NHTSA are not frivolous. They make these recalls because there's a serious safety problem. Now, is the notice of a car bag less serious than brakes that are challenged? I don't know. Ask a parent with a newborn. I think at this point, what we need to rely upon is that there's still some level of intelligence left in the federal government, in NHTSA, the manufacturers who agree to these recalls. There aren't hundreds of them that come. There are not hundreds of them. There are occasional recall notices for serious problems associated with those vehicles and driving them off the lot. To call it a burden, to ask a car dealer before they sell a car to click a mouse is just astonishing if it's going to save a life. And so, again, the question of the seriousness, these are, the recalls don't come 20 a day. And when they come, they are because there is a serious safety issue. To gradate them, to try to grade them, I think is more burdensome than just simply to say you are burdening at that point. And our definition of safety recall does not include service campaigns or emissions issues. We're talking about the immediate concern about the actual safety of that vehicle and the people who are in that vehicle.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of examples of NHTSA's recalls that we feel don't actually affect the driver's ability to safely drive the vehicle. I'll give you 3 examples, and I have more. This is from 2011. Volkswagen recalled all vehicles in terms, 2011, 2012 Jetta Sonatas because the exhaust tips were too long and may actually burn a person if they walked by the vehicle. Another example is 2008, 2010 through 13 Toyota Tundras, 2010 through 2012 RAV4s, 2012 Toyota Sequoias, 2010, 2011 Toyota Corollas, 2010, 2011 Toyota Camrys and Camry Hybrids, 2010 through 2013 Toyota Highlanders, and it goes on to include Land Cruisers, 4Runners, Tacomas, all of which were mislabeled about their load carrying capacity labels. Another, and my final example, is the Subaru, and this is the example I gave earlier. The owner's manual contained a misdescription of the actual operation of the front passenger occupant classification system. So as you can see, some of these issues and some of the recalls we would agree are airbag, brakes, steering column related. Others are involving owner's manuals, mislabels. There is no distinction that NHTSA makes because to NHTSA, a recall is a recall. And what NHTSA does is they issue and tell manufacturers you've got to fix the part, but you've got to send out notification to the consumers. Well, consumers get the notification, but on far too many recalls, consumers don't have their cars brought in to be repaired. And yet at the same time, this bill is asking us to remove these vehicles out of the stream of commerce. We just don't think that is the proper approach for this bill.
Ms. Eggman.
It's not in the analysis.
And some of my issues are the same as Mr. Mullen, and I talked with the senator earlier about the issue of excluding rental cars. And I hear you were saying we should trust the federal government, but I'm still waiting on a lot of issues that the federal government we were supposed to depend upon them for. So I have an issue with that, and then I see some of the rental cars are also supportive of the bill, which, it just doesn't look good. Like they're supporting the bill and they're carved out of the bill.
But they're supporting the bill, the rental car companies that sell vehicles. So when they are supporting this upon this, when they sell those cars, they agree that they should have to be subjected to this. It's not, it's not like, oh yeah, I support this for the other reasons, but it's because when they do sell them, they are willing to agree to and comply with the provisions of this bill.
It just seems like we should treat everybody the same. If this is about safety, that everybody then should be treated in the same. And I'm like all of us. I'm a very busy person. I'm embarrassed to say I have 2 recalls on my car right now. That I probably should, but they're small, little, minor things that I just haven't been able to make the time to do the appointment to take it in. So I apologize I wasn't here for all the testimony, but do you? Because from what I understand, the 2 people who testified would not have been protected by this bill. And so I'm wondering, what kind of data do you have that a problem actually exists?
Well, yeah.
Okay. The Congress, if I could respond, the Congress mandated that the Government Accountability Office assess the U.S. safety recall system, and the GAO found, and I quote directly, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration cannot require used car dealers or franchise dealerships that sell used vehicles to get the defect remedied prior to sale. With over 35 million used cars sold by used and franchise dealerships in the United States in 2000 alone, this could pose a significant risk to the safety of millions of vehicle drivers and may have a negative impact on recall completion rates. And when the dealers refer to the recall completion rates and say that, like 30% of recalls aren't completed, a lot of those are vehicles that are owned by dealers. And one thing we want to accomplish with this bill is, as vehicles get traded in, if a dealer doesn't want to fix it, they can sell it to another dealer who will fix it. And we want them, if they're going to put a family into that car, just to make sure that it's safe. And as far as the levels of safety recalls, the language that the committee recommended that the author has agreed to take specifies it.
If I could just ask, so the data that a problem exists is that a lot of recalls aren't done. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Plus, there are a number of incidents. For instance, there was a consumer who testified at the hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee who was a mom who bought a used Ford Windstar. And she had 3 kids. She told the dealer she wanted a minivan, so it was really safe. He said, don't worry, we did the 156-point inspection. And she was driving in it with her boyfriend when the axle broke. And she found out about the safety recall in a really horrendous way. And this was something where she found out just by contacting Ford. And the dealer could have done that before. And there are many news reports about documenting this problem. The Today Show, CBS Early Show, TV, all of them in the state have gone on dealers' lots and documented dealers telling people that the car was perfectly safe, and when the news team had the safety recall in their hands.
Let me, the opposition, make a brief comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Eggman, also that GAO report, as stated in your analysis, did not recommend notification to car owners, not the remedy of the actual defect. So removing the vehicle from the stream of commerce, telling us that the car has to sit until parts are available, it's very different than notifying the consumer. And additionally, some of the media reports that Ms. Sheehan is talking about that Good Morning America and others have reported on, as far as we're aware, those have not been in here in California. They have been in other states.
I'm sorry, but those are...
I'm not going to allow the debate back and forth between folks.
That actually is not correct.
We'll go to Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've been at this a long time, so truncate some questions I had, but I would like to confirm with those who either are in the business or representing the industry that there is a basic safety check required of every used car before it is sold by a dealer. Isn't that correct? That it complies with the California Vehicle Code for major safety items?
Yes, Mr. Dixon, that is correct.
And isn't it correct that if a dealer is going to sell a used car with a warranty, they would do additional work to make sure that major parts and elements of the vehicle are in satisfactory condition, so that they would in fact give a warranty as opposed to selling the car as is?
Yes,
that would be done, correct?
Yes, and may I also state that on behalf of CarMax, all of CarMax's cars are provided with a 30-day warranty automatically.
And would it be prudent practice for at least for a dealer who takes in a car of the same manufacturer as the dealers selling new cars to check to see if there are any recalls, in particular safety recalls on the vehicle?
Yes, if we are aware of them. If you are a Ford dealer and you bring in a trade in that is a Ford, we can check, because we're part of the Ford family, to be able to find out if there's a recall on it, and we will fix that.
And a prudent dealer would do that, wouldn't a prudent dealer?
I would say a prudent dealer of the own line make of the trade-in, yes.
So, in essence, what this bill is seeking to require is simply that instead of only checking safety recalls on same make vehicles as the dealer otherwise sells and takes in and sells on a used car basis, that the dealer would go to a database that will be provided through NHTSA to check whether cars not of a make that they otherwise sell as new vehicles have any safety recalls on them. Isn't that all this bill requires?
No, the bill does more than just that, Mr. Dickinson. This bill actually says not only do you have to not only do you have to say if you knew or should have known of the recall of whether or not the car is being able to be sold as a certified used vehicle, but in addition, the car actually says that even if the part is not available, which happens frequently, or if there is a recall on that particular car because we are aware of it because the Auto News or other media outlets has reported it, but that particular car's VIN number is in the A through M and not in the N through Z, and the manufacturers are starting with N through Z, that the parts are available for those, not the A through M. So as you can imagine, that it's much more complicated than what you are suggesting.
So is the implication of that then that a Ford dealer who takes in a Volkswagen checks the database and finds that there's a safety recall that without a certain replacement part the accelerator could stick and cause an accident, should be under no obligation, and wouldn't, as a prudent dealer, make sure that they didn't sell that car before they could make that fix?
I'm saying that our dealers would want to get if they know that the database is operational, which is a big question mark at this point. We don't know what the database is going to look like. And if we are aware that there is a particular acceleration issue on that vehicle, and we call another Volkswagen dealer to have it fixed, we would get it fixed. But that's not, the bill does way more than that, Mr. Dickinson. Telling us that, let's say that acceleration, there's a recall on that acceleration part, but that part's not yet available. For example, there's a number of Japanese made cars right now whose airbags have been recalled, yet none of the parts has been made. So what do we do with all Toyotas, Hondas, every Japanese-made car? We essentially put this car...
You sell them to people? Is that what you do? You sell a car that you may be unsafe to someone?
But the part isn't available to fix. So is your suggestion, Mr.
Wait. No. Answer the question. Would you believe one of your members would sell a car that it knows is unsafe and subject to a safety recall?
No, I think the answer to that question is no. I think the problem is the no standard, is that we don't know what this database is going to look like. So we're all shooting in the dark here. We want to... I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at you and talk about the...
Don't worry about it. It's the arrangement here. Don't worry.
We are trying to protect customers CarMax has no objection to what this bill is trying to accomplish. It is simply premature. I think that we have regulations coming out Sunday, as the author stated. Once we know what the database is even going to look like, we will know how we can comply. Our concern is that we're forcing a mandate, but we don't actually know what the solution looks like. We want to solve the problem. We want to make sure that every car that we sell is knowingly safe. But we don't know at this point in time. And the problem is that we don't know what the database is going to look like. We don't know what the language in the bill is even going to look like. And that is, we're jamming a solution through when in reality this should probably be a 2-year bill. Wait the week for the regulation so that we can all solve this problem with a good, well-drafted solution.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love to pursue this. I'm not going to. I think the point here is hopefully clear that any reputable dealer wouldn't sell a car that it knows is unsafe. And this is a bill that would make it the obligation of a dealer to refer to a database that would be available that would identify whether cars were subject to a safety recall that might make the car unsafe. I understand that there's some concern about exactly what that database might look like and how accessible it might be, how usable it might be. But I would also say, having spent some time in this field, that you can get technical service bulletins, recall information, and they are very clear, and they are not hard to understand, and they are very specific about what needs to be done. I assume, and I imagine the NHTSA database is going to be no less usable and available. But as this bill moves forward, and I hope it does, there's still some time. There's another committee. There's still a floor that gives us an opportunity to make further refinements if it's necessary. And I appreciate the testimony that there's not objection to the objective of this bill, as I understand the opposition. It's more concerns about operationally how it works, and those are things that we can be solving along the way.
Yes.
Instead of taking the risk of people losing their lives.
I might indicate this bill is double referred to Judiciary Committee, so that can be addressed there. But I also just submitted a letter from NHTSA. We asked them whether car dealers currently have access to up-to-date VIN-specific information regarding the safety recall status of used cars. Folks, this stuff is already online. It's been online for a long time. This isn't, oh my goodness, this thing could look like, Daffy Duck on steroids. That's not what this database is going to look like. In fact, you don't even need a database to get this information at this point in time. It's already available. That's what the NHTSA says. It's there. If you plug in the VIN number, you go to Volkswagen, you plug in the VIN number, it will tell you if there's a recall. You call, if you don't know that, you call the phone number that exists for each of the manufacturers. So this isn't a new issue. What we've agreed to do to make it easier is to allow the dealer to go to one place, to this database. Now, the database might end up just giving you links to the phone numbers or to the online information from the various manufacturers. The information, though, is there. And I know this when I went in to look at new cars, if I wanted to customize the color, they were there with a click of the mouse telling me the different blends that I could put together. All we're asking here is that you go to whether or not the car is safe by clicking the mouse on the VIN number. This is not rocket science. This is really just designed, as I think Assemblyman Dickinson said, that it is so easy right now, if you do truly care about the safety of a car and not selling a car that has a known safety problem until it's fixed. It's already there, but we've agreed to take that amendment. We are going to, if the bill, if you and your discretion decide to move this bill forward, it will be in Judiciary Committee. We will have a chance at that point in time to see what this mysterious database is going to look like, and I would submit to you that it could be one of several things, all of which already exist and are frankly quite user-friendly. It's just having the will to do this to protect the consumer. That's what this bill does. And on the Assembly Member Eggman, the question about rental cars. If Congress can't produce, can't perform, I'm at 50-50 on this. I'd be happy to raise that as the next step. But let's start somewhere. Let's start here. This is not onerous. This is about protecting the lives of people who go to a dealer who want to know that when they drive that car off the lot, it's as safe as the car can possibly be. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. It's a used car. But if we know there's a problem with that car, isn't it incumbent upon the dealer to make sure that that problem is fixed before they sell that car, so that we're all on the road, we're as safe as we possibly can be. Not 100%, there's no 100%, but safer than we will be today. And I think that with that, I would be happy to close.
Well, Mr. Jones would like to speak first.
Okay.
I'll defer to the Vice Chair.
And then we'll follow with Mr. Wilk.
You and I have had some very good conversations on other issues.
Enjoyed them
and I
very
appreciate
much.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually on the fence on whether to bring these things up or not. But there's some elements of your opening testimony that, to me, were offensive and I believe disingenuous. One of your comments in your opening statement was that used cars are primarily purchased by, you didn't use the word poor, but disadvantaged and students, and you seem to create this class warfare between people that are buying new cars and used cars. Dave Ramsey is a very well-known financial advisor, best-selling author, and he highly recommends that all folks buy used vehicles because they're, in his opinion, a better value. For somebody who used to sell cars, both new and used, I've dealt with all ends of the economic spectrum on new cars and used cars, on people that are purchasing them. The testimony from your witness on the accident, that was a very horrible incident that happened in my hometown. And the first responders that I deal with every day at home were the ones that responded to that accident. I've heard the 911 tape played. I've heard it from the beginning to the end. And that accident still resonates. There's still a ripple effect in my community from that accident. And for you to take advantage of that situation and try to compel votes out of this committee on an emotional level, and now it's been brought up several times that that accident wouldn't even been prevented by this bill. I find that very disingenuous. But putting those emotional things aside, on the elements of the bill itself, car dealers in California have such an onerous regulation on them from Sacramento and this legislature that the friends that I have in the business tell me it's almost illegal to sell a vehicle because there's no pathway to, there's so many private rights of action against a car dealership in California that it's almost impossible to dot every I and cross every T on the contract that's 18 inches long and has language on the front and the back that's all compelled by this legislature. And then, to throw this in the mix, and you're creating a whole nother private right of action against car dealerships. And then in addition to all the other testimony that I'm not going to rehash against your bill today, those are my comments. I'm not supporting the bill today. That's but I just had to get that out there. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. May I respond, because I feel as though there's a need to sort of clarify, if I might, if you'd indulge me. Just we're naming the bill for this family. That's the reason we presented them. Had you had the opportunity to listen when we brought this bill in the Senate, I brought out a woman from Kansas whose axle in her car, it was referenced here, had broken, and she was seriously injured, as were the other people in her car. She's never been on an airplane before. She didn't like it, and so she wasn't willing to come back. But that's an example of a car that was under a manufacturer's recall. There are probably many others, and I appreciate your concern about this one, but we are naming the bill after this family, which is why we brought them forward. As far as the low-income issue, my parents used to say, don't buy a used car, you're buying somebody else's problems. There are all sorts of people who buy new cars and used cars, but my point is that when we address the question of who are we selling cars to, we are selling them, a used car is frequently sold to people who can't afford to buy a new car. And if they bought a new car, they would be protected by the law, by federal law. But because they're buying a used car, they are not protected. That's the distinction that I was trying to draw, and I appreciate the opportunity to make those comments.
Mr. Wilk.
Well, as somebody who just helped his daughter buy a used car, I'm certainly sympathetic, and it took a long time to find the right car with her limited budget, and me being in the legislature now and not in a financial position to help her like I once was able to. My concerns are, it seems like we're driving this too quickly based upon the testimony we're hearing that we got regulations and a website coming out. And you did mention, it's just a click of a mouse away, but I believe that not all manufacturers are online, so can you guys
Yes, that's
clarify
correct.
that?
Looking at the sponsor's website, there are 33 manufacturers listed, and only 12 of them have websites where you can actually plug in a VIN and receive the information. The example used by the author, Volkswagen, in fact, does not allow you to search based on the VIN. Some of them do require you to set up accounts. Volkswagen does not allow you, as a member of the public, to either search by VIN or to create an account. And again, all of the terms and use prohibit commercial use. Also wanted to just mention that the issue of a safety bulletin for review was brought up by Mr. Dickinson. Recall information is actually not in safety bulletins, so that's not an option for us to comply.
It's actually online, and we have here a list of the you mentioned not for the public. We're not asking that the public be the ones to have to identify this information. It's a dealer before they sell you the car. They have access to it. We have here, I don't know if this is boring or not, but I have here the list of all the companies. Either they are online already, or you call their toll-free number to get the information. That's all they have to do.
And then, Mr. Chair, I've got one more question. If you could maybe expand, because for my satisfaction, you didn't really answer the question. The opponents laid out a list of things that are recalled that are really not safety issues that you may not be able to access. I mean, to me, it stops commerce. It stops consumer choice. I mean, God gave us a brain, and I think for most of us, common sense. And so I think there is a difference between, obviously, a genuine safety issue versus something that's pretty minor, and is my understanding from reading through, it's all lumped together.
I think I mentioned that our definition of safety recall does not include, I think it was an amendment requested, does not include service campaigns or emissions issues. So you don't have to address those. These are issues of safety if you are personal safety, direct safety, as a result of some infirmity with the car itself. That's what we're talking about. And so we have deleted the service campaigns issue or emissions issues. Arguably, those can create greenhouse gases, but those don't deal with the direct safety of the person either in the car or who could be injured as a result of the car.
Mr. Ting.
Sorry, I'll try to be brief. So, Mr. Cerrito, you mentioned that you felt that this was fairly easy to do. I think Mr. Costa has described all the various issues as to why there are problems. Could you tell us why you think that this is easy to implement relative to Mr.
As a matter of practical application, thank you for asking me. The way that it works is that whenever a dealer, a new car dealer, if you take a trade-in from a customer, if you buy a car at the auction, or if you purchase a car outright from the customer, as soon as that car becomes your property and you give the person the check for it, a repair order, service repair order is written. When the service repair order is written, it also says complete the smog and safety check. And as a matter of course, the dealers that I know that are doing this right now, they get on the phone. They find it the easiest way because they talk to each other every day, and every town has just about every manufacturer there is. You call the dealer and you say, hey, I just took in a Chrysler 300. Bob, do you have any recalls on this car? They say yay or nay. You ask them if there are recalls. You set up an appointment. You take the vehicle over there. They fix the car and they bring it back. It's not taking a car out of the system, because a car traditionally as a car dealership has to be scheduled for smog and safety anyway. You don't do it instantaneously. So the turnaround for a dealer might be 7 to 10 days. You like to shorten that up and get it for retail right away, but it does take some time. This is just another step, and as I said, you get paid back because those dealers that the Chrysler dealer takes in a Toyota that I sell, and I get his business in my shop, and it's just self-generating, but it takes these cars that are a danger to the consumer out of the market of being a danger. So they're fixed, and it may not correct everything, because we don't regulate what the consumer does that when they sell a car on their front lawn to another customer, but this is another step that eliminates a fraction of that, and which is a good thing.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Mr. Costa, Ms. Jack, the same kind of question also. So when you do the intake, obviously when you're buying somebody else's car, especially a trade-in, I'm sure you have no interest in buying a car that you really can't sell. So what protocols are you following, and why would sort of this legislation be different or difficult from what you're already doing anyways?
Sure. So actually, what the gentleman described is basically current practice for CarMax. As you know, we don't have any franchisees in California. So we are used cars, and our practice is to take in a vehicle and to call our nearby franchisee. We try to make good friends with them and ask them to run a VIN. And if they say that there is a recall on that particular vehicle, then we take it over, and we're happy to do business with them and have them repair that recall. The problem with the current scenario is that while we're doing our best to protect customers, there is no guarantee that the person on the other end of the phone didn't mistype the VIN or isn't eating lunch and failing to put the VIN in at all. So we're not protected legally. And so the liabilities that come with this bill will create a situation where if you're not the franchisee of that particular make of a vehicle, you are completely reliant on what is an upcoming database to comply with the bill. And while we're doing our very best with the information that's available, and the most timely information that's available currently is with the franchisee, which is why that's our current practice, is because we want the most timely information available so we can best protect our customers. But again, there are no guarantees that it's a 16-digit VIN. Somebody didn't mistype a V for a W, or forgive me, I don't have a keyboard in front of me, maybe an M for an M. I think they're next to each other. But that's the challenge that we face. And so that's why we think that in order to implement this concept, we are completely reliant on a database that is publicly available, because we don't have a special relationship with any manufacturer. So we need to rely on whatever would be publicly available, and that's why our concern is waiting timeliness for the database. And I think Mr. Costa wanted to.
The additional problem is in the scenario that he laid out, at the time of the trade-in, you're unaware of whether or not that vehicle is subject to a recall, Mr. Ting. So what ends up happening is I'm a Ford dealer, you come in with your Honda, and I say, I don't know if you have a recall on this or not. So instead of giving you $5,000 for your Honda, I'm going to give you $2,000 on that trade-in. And if you're not happy with that, then you're going to take that vehicle and go to the private market, where the private market is unprotected by this bill altogether. And so, in adding to Ms. Jack's comments, we find that to be a concern from a public policy standpoint. Consumers don't get the consumer information and the protections that they get by buying their vehicles at dealers. They furthermore don't help local small business owners, and they further don't generate sales and use tax and VLF dollars for state and local economies.
I want to respond to that. Go ahead.
Mr. Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I really don't have any questions. Just a reaction. I think all of the questions I had have been asked and answered, and I think that I think it's clear to me that the senator has made compelling arguments around the goals of this legislation. But I think equally there have been some concerns raised about the operational implementation or efficiencies of how to move forward. And quite frankly, listening to the discussion back and forth, proponent and opponent seem to support the goals. And so I guess for me, and I know that there's still question about the rental car component, my position on this today is not to vote on the bill. I think it's a great bill in terms of the goal and what you're trying to accomplish, but I do think that there's an opportunity over time to bring the different elements of this together to make it probably a bill that has even the opponents in support. And so based on that information, I just wanted to go on record with my position.
Okay. Senator, appreciated, first of all, I appreciated the debate that we've had, and I appreciated the opportunity to meet with you on this legislation last night. And I understand your passion for this issue. Certainly it was clear to me last night, and I appreciated that part of our conversation. I remain troubled by the fact that if this is good for consumers who buy cars, it ought to be good for consumers who rent cars.
Absolutely.
And I understand that there's some federal effort. Frankly, I don't have much confidence that will happen. And I'd rather see us address the issue in California. As I look at the legislation, if we continue to carve out the rental cars, it does concern me that the dealers would also have to take care of recalls on cars that are leased or loaned out by a dealer. So it's not just it's not apples to apples. It's not sales and sales. It's sales, leases, and sales. So that kind of concerns me because I'm one who has a very strong value for fairness and equity, and I don't necessarily see that component of equity. Having listened to this debate, I do believe that this bill is best as a work in progress. And I am not going to vote for the bill today. I'm hopeful that you'll consider making this a 2-year bill, that it would come back to this committee in January. By that time, we'd have information on the database, hopefully some information about federal efforts to get a bill passed relative to rental cars. So having said that, I'd now like to provide you with an opportunity for your close and to make your final argument in support of the bill.
Well, I appreciate that. And, part of the question, a lot of what we do here is a work in progress. The database is coming out next week. My suspicion is, and based upon the past history of this bill, there's really not going to be much we're going to do to placate the car dealers. If the members are concerned about that, and that they understand the principle of the bill, and that their concern is about that issue, I'm certainly happy to delay it. As I mentioned, the bill is scheduled, it is double referred, it is scheduled to be heard in the Judiciary Committee. It would be after the database comes out. And I would ask that if you feel that this is headed in the right direction, that you allow us to continue going forward. We have taken a number of amendments as requested. I'm happy to continue working on that. As far as the rental car issue is concerned, I totally understand that this should be a bill that includes everybody. Okay, because we want safety. The problem is, at this point in time, there is a federal bill going forward. It does have some different issues, but of course the ultimate goal is safety. And I can submit to you that if this federal bill, and I know we're not finding much happening on the congressional level, and if that continues to be the case, then I would certainly be happy to bring that as sort of phase 2 of this bill. But right now, the focus of this bill is on licensed California car dealerships and what is their responsibility to the public. And when it comes to selling a car that is in their possession, it isn't quite as complicated, I think, as has been created here, because as testified to, this information is truly available. It's just you have to want to get it. But you don't have to go very far to get it. You just go online or you make a phone call. This is not that complicated. Now, I guess part of the theory is if you can make something so complicated, everybody throws up their hands and say, I give up, then you can defeat the bill. I can tell you I am prepared to extend this to a 2-year bill if what I'm saying actually has some merit. If it's just a question we continue this, make it a 2-year bill, and then it just dies because, oh, well, you know, we're not going to fix that. I don't think we're going to fix the rental car issue in that short order. And if we bring that into the bill, it adds different layers of that will add different layers of complexity. And so we won't have addressed the car dealers' responsibilities at this point in time, nor will we in January. My goal is to make sure, to the extent possible, that people don't drive out of a car dealership with a car with a known safety defect, because these accidents do happen, and they have happened. And if not a situation where we're under recall here today, I can tell you that we have had testimony from people who have been seriously injured because of known defects that the dealer did not tell them about or did not fix, actually, before the car was sold. So I am willing to acknowledge the concerns if you feel that this is something where the opportunity would, once we get this notice, in a week. As I said, it is going to Judish, so we would have that to deal with. I would be happy to continue working on it at that point in time, but if it is the will of this committee that we defer it until January, I would be willing to do that.
We'll accept that as your close. Mr. Dickinson, based on your earlier comments, were you...
Well, I've listened carefully to the author's comments in closing, and while I would be prepared to move the bill today, I think these issues are solvable. Actually, when you clear away the underbrush, and I think it probably is one where the discretion is the better part of valor this morning. So I'm hearing the author say she's willing to make this a 2-year bill to continue to work on it, and I certainly would be more than happy to be part of any effort in that regard, Mr. Chairman. So in light of that, I won't make a motion.
All right. Is anyone prepared to make a motion in support of this bill? Seeing none, Senator, appreciate the debate, appreciate your passion and commitment to this issue, and look forward to continuing to work with you on this bill as it moves forward to the second year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, my only passion is to try to protect the good people of this state, make them safe when they're in a car. Thank you.
Thank you.